it happened so suddenly. The enemy opened up, initiated this attack, and during this first engagement, I was laying on the ground, and I remember I couldn't even really see around me or see through my scope because of so many rounds and hitting the ground around me, dust being kicked up. And one of those rounds came in, impacted the wall of the shed that I was lying in front of. When it did ricochet and come down, and of course, hit the 3-inch space where I didn't have body armor, that was an eye-opening experience that really set the precedent for the days and months that would follow.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade
to meet this mounting aggression.
And make no mistake about it, good will prevail.
My mom's dad was in the Navy. Unfortunately, he died when I was young. But other than him, just me figuring out the life of service in the military. I've always been scared of regret. And I knew college was always going to be there. So I didn't want to, while feeling this calling to join the military, I didn't want to wake up one day and regret having missed that opportunity. So I don't think anyone knows exactly what they're getting into with a life of service and really a life of many unknowns. I'm thankful I made the decision I did. I would absolutely do it again. I went to many different recruiters, all of the branches, and I really, self-reflected and thought about it. But at the end of the day, I joined the Marine Corps because I had always welcomed challenge growing up, whether blowing bubbles, sitting in the recliner with my dad with gum, or on the football field in high school. Never really externally, just always with myself, always trying to get faster, stronger, better. And so when I thought about the Marine Corps, I wanted something that would push me to and hopefully beyond those limits that I knew. And, with that, do something that really made me look deep down inside myself, to make it that next step or push through whatever is in my ways. Believe that the Marine Corps would do that, and it did. I had, thankfully, been a squad leader for most of boot camp, except for about the first week. Seeing a direct correlation of even that simple foot drill movement, I messed that up as a squad leader at the very front of the squad, and then the rest of my squad suffered for it, and we all got off step. And so it wasn't just my mistake now, and it was a good lesson, and as simple as it was, it made me realize that even the smallest of things affects all of the Marines around you. Before we even touched down, I vividly remember we were in the back of Marine helicopter, Super Stallion, and the back was open. I mean, we were on the last leg, day number 10 of our journey from the States to our small patrol base outpost that we were going to be living and operating for that deployment. And so being in that environment, the back is open, you have a door gunner. I remember looking back and seeing the door gunner and looking out of the back of that helicopter. And two things were so surreal that it still doesn't even feel real thinking about it and talking about it. But I remember looking out and seeing just patches in different shades of brown and green and farmland. And I remember thinking, like, am I going to step on an IED in that field? Or am I going to bleed out in that canal? And it wasn't a scared thought. It was just, wow. The crew chief, a crew chief rides in the back of the helicopter. He's obviously part of the crew, but he communicates with the pilots, make sure everyone's buckled in, make sure it's as smooth as ride as possible for all the Marines in the back. At this point, we had been going through bases. We hadn't touched down, really outside of friendly lines or any bases yet. And so we didn't have ammunition. And I remember the crew chief is obviously extremely loud, but as I'm looking out the back, I'm interrupted by this crew chief handing me belts of ammo for my saw. And at 20 years old saying, hey, we're probably going to take contact before we even touch down. I'm thinking like, this is so surreal and this is crazy. I guess set the tone for the entire deployment. For that 4 months, we were living primitively. The first 2 months or so we were there, slept on the ground, no showers for the entire deployment. And every single day from sunup to sundown was um, a fight for survival. And it was never a matter of, wonder if we're going to get shot at today. It was a matter of when. And every single day from sunup to sundown was a fight. But when you get there, you send out your platoon sergeant and your most likely a lieutenant, a platoon commander. They interact with the Marines that have been there on the ground, go on patrols, get a feel for the area. Then you work your way down. So it was time for me to go on this patrol, stepped out of friendly lines, and roughly an hour after getting outside of our patrol base, we came under our first attack, and it was our first firefight of the deployment. And I was laying at the end of a road at a dead end, but looking through my scope and trying to cover as much of the field in front of us, which obviously would be an avenue of approach for the enemy as possible. I'm laying up against this wall, and it was a shed like many of the compounds over there have to dry out their crops, help process the drugs that fund Taliban and terrorist activities. It happened so suddenly. The enemy opened up, initiated this attack, and it was the one and only time I ever laid down behind my saw the entire 4-month deployment. From that moment on, every single firefight I shot from the standing or the kneeling, because during this first engagement, I was laying on the ground and I remember I couldn't even really see around me or see through my scope because of so many rounds and hitting the ground around me, dust being kicked up. And one of those rounds came in, impacted the wall of the shed that I was lying in front of, and thankfully took enough momentum out of the round that when it did ricochet and come down and, of course, hit the 3-inch space where I didn't have body armor and down to where my belt line started, it did hit me in the lower back, and I thought I was hit. And I remember saying I was hit, telling my fellow Marines, grabbing my weapon, and running backwards to cover. And it turned out to be, I guess you could just think of it as a bad paintball hit. I just remember as I was running back thinking like, no way, I cannot get taken out. I can't leave my guys first firefight, really first day of my deployment and most of ours. That was an eye-opening experience that really set the precedent for the days and months that would follow. So the compound we were in, we had only been there for roughly 2 days. I've got asked a lot, like, why were you at a different place than you had been living and operating? But we were at 4 months out of our 7-month deployment and looking ahead to that next unit of Marines relieving you so you can go home. Before they get there, you want to, like everything in life, leave it better than you found it at your area of operation. So to push the bad guys out even further, to create more stability, you want to expand your area of operation, hold that ground. Now, it might be very beginning steps of that stability and foundation. There were 3 villages to the south of Patrol Base Beatley and the village that we had lived and operated for those 4 months. But on November 19th, myself and just my squad, which a squad is roughly 12 Marines with a Navy corpsman who we rely on for medical care attached, we hiked down to do just that, to take over a compound, put our foot in the ground and try to survive and hold that ground. And so Marines always have Marines on watch, on guard duty. And that was the job and the shift that my fellow Marine and I were on top of that roof. As they did every day, the enemy initiated a daylight attack. And until the past few days, we had not seen hand grenades throughout our deployment. Afghanistan, especially Marjah, we were fighting across fields and tree line to tree line and canal to canal. And so, unlike Iraq, which more of the fighting was urban environments, house to house and street to street, closer proximity to throw grenades. But Afghanistan, we had not got that close on a consistent enough basis to be able to throw hand grenades. We were towards the end of our 4-hour shift, and it was mid-afternoon. And the attack started. 3 grenades were thrown to start the attack. I don't remember those 3, which all were thrown within the compound and inside the walls. The 4th was thrown and landed in very close proximity to me and Nick on that roof. I don't remember seeing the grenade, thinking about it. All I remember is physically how I felt after. Later, after many years and over a 250-page, very thorough and extensive investigation done by the Marine Corps and Department of Defense, it was determined, and also from eyewitness testimonies and post-blast analysis and forensics done by explosive ordnance disposal team on my gear and the area of the blast, it was determined that I covered the grenade for my fellow Marine. But physically, how I felt after is the first thing was just pure confusion and disorientation. I couldn't see anything. It was as if I was looking at a TV with no connection, just white and gray static. My ears were ringing, extremely loud. And that was interrupted by what I thought was, and this will allude to Marine's humor, but my buddies pouring warm water all over me. I was thinking, really, guys, like in this banged up state I'm in, you're messing with me right now. But that final kind of question mark piece allowed for the other ones to fall in place to give me the surreal and unfortunate realization that what I was feeling was not warm water, that it was blood, and I was profusely bleeding out. And I knew from physically how I felt, in addition to the medical training we received before we deploy, and unfortunately the casualties that I'd seen up until that point on deployment, I knew that my time was limited. So I thought about my family, specifically my mother, who would be beyond devastated that I did not survive to make it home. I said a quick prayer for forgiveness and anything I had done wrong, and that was followed by a tiredness that completely consumed me and is, I feel, impossible to recount. But I became extremely exhausted, and I thought those were my final moments, and I faded from consciousness in the world on that hot, dusty rooftop in Afghanistan. And I woke up roughly 5 weeks later, and my first sight was slowly opening the only eye I had left to Christmas stockings that my mom had hung on my hospital room wall, decorating my room for Christmas with snow outside on my window. And I had no idea where I was, but waking up on the other side of the world at Walter Reed really was the start of my journey. There was many journeys that helped keep me alive and helped me get to where I am today before I even woke up. That started my journey and my 3-year recovery at Walter Reed, and really my journey of figuring out this new life and body that I have been dealt and how to reclaim it and make the most of it. Just because we survive off the battlefield, not only does it end there and everything's fine, but it's a long, dark, scary, and painful journey at times. And it's not just us going through it, it's military families and our loved ones who stay by the bed and hold our hands, conscious or not. It's almost too crazy to comprehend how everything happened from that medevac with one space for a casualty on it, already en route to the hospital, and they just happened to be flying by. My medevac arrived in 12 minutes, a second miracle. As we were waiting on that, and I don't remember this, but talking to my buddies after, my legs, the small amount of tissue damage they had compared to the rest of me, were not a priority. But my buddies, from what they told me, they just kind of had the thought of, hey, it couldn't hurt. While we have the combat galls and the time, might as well wrap away. They wrapped my legs. And as I was going to be put on that medevac, Doc Friend went to go give me his last morphine shot, I guess. We only had one left because of the amount of casualties we had had up until that point on deployment. He went to go administer that last morphine shot, and the very small and fragile needle caught that combat gauze on my leg, and it bent it, and he wasn't able to administer it. And now, after going through the steps of the medevac process and back to the United States, not only did we learn that I had to be resuscitated 3 times, but when I arrived at the combat trauma hospital, I was labeled PEA, which is pulseless electrical activity. And they told me that if I would have received any morphine, that it would have depressed my respiratory system to the point of being unrecoverable. Waking up to uh, a long list of injuries and things that had been altered and changed during those 5 weeks that I was unconscious. Facial reconstruction and surgeries and reconstruction by my oral maxillofacial team. Me and mom lost the battle of trying to keep count, but if I had to guess, I would say roughly 40. After I got done with my first 3 months in the hospital, I got my trach out. I got off the machines that were helping keep me alive. And so at that time in early 2011, there was so many casualties, unfortunately, coming back that Walter Reed was so full. I remember at one point, and it was only for a day or two, but they were putting patients in the hallway and setting up their beds in the hallway. So with that said, some of us that they knew, uh, I think that they could kind of trust to go on an extended leave back home. But also people they knew that in Marines that they knew had a long road to recovery that would have to come back to Walter Reed no matter what. They allowed us, and myself specifically, once they kind of stabilized us, made sure that we're alive and well, uh, they allowed us to go home with the understanding that we would recover at home. I would get mom's good food, relax on the couch with my dog, uh, with the understanding that I would do therapy at a local hospital at home. And every week or two, I would my mom would drive me back up to Walter Reed to do surgeries. So early spring of 2011, I had just left the hospital and I was at home. And one night around 10 o'clock, I was struggling, to say the least, to make a bowl of cereal. Like, it was probably a half-gallon jug of milk, but it was so heavy. Like, I hadn't had the nerve surgeries on my arms or hands yet. I had very little function. My face, I couldn't feel it, 1, because of the nerve damage. 2, the grenade blew most of my teeth out. And so all around, just a struggle. I finally get the bowl of cereal made, and I'm sitting at the kitchen counter, and it wasn't the struggle of making that bowl of cereal, or I wasn't in pain or anything like that that made me break. I think while trying to eat it, milk was going everywhere. Not only was it hard to make the bowl, but it was almost impossible to eat it. But the main component I think was I had tried to stay so strong and positive and like thumbs up all day, every day for my parents, my doctors, everyone who was with me for those first 3 months at Walter Reed. Because the hardest part of my recovery was the burden of knowing that my parents were suffering through my recovery with me. And not only did they not ask for it, I know their parents, they love me. They reassured me every day that it was their honor to take care of me and get me better. But it's still hard to know that your parents are really struggling seeing their not only firstborn son completely fallen apart, but to really see me suffering every single second of every day that I was awake. In that moment, with milk going all over my face, I broke. And it was by far my lowest point, and I was crying. And mom came into the kitchen, and she, rightfully so, thought I was in pain. Immediately gave me a hug, asking me what's wrong. And I just asked her who's ever going to love me again. And it was a very tough moment, but one that I'm thankful for because I realized after a few minutes of crying and having that kind of breakdown moment, I realized that it's okay to not only have those moments, but to take your time with your unique struggle to anyone. That was just my situation. It's okay to take that time to heal and to have those breakdown moments. But I'm thankful that, minutes later, I realized you cut out all the noise in life. And anytime you're presented an opportunity, you really only have two options. I could have chose, which I'm thankful I did, to get up and take that small step. Or in a way, I could have sat at that kitchen counter for the rest of my life. So I chose to get up and take that step and chose to reclaim my life. And I had no idea not only what I was doing at the time, I didn't know how long I was going to be recovering. I didn't really even know what the next day or therapy session held. I'm glad I had that realization as well because I think a lot of people get so wrapped up in, oh, I don't have a plan or I don't really know like where I'm going in life. And that's fine. A lot of times it's just taking that small step forward and in good time, putting the next one right after it. I had done my 3 years of recovery, and the calls started coming towards the end of 2013, looking ahead to spring and early summer of 14 when I received the medal. At first, it was just, how's life going? Where are you at? What are you doing? Checking up on me. Things quickly got official as the investigation got to a point high enough where not even the Marine Corps really knew where it was at, if it was going to happen. But no matter what, if it did or did not, we had to prepare. But I got the call from the president. He told me, not only was he proud of me and what my fellow Marines did, but that based upon the Secretary of the Navy and the Secretary of Defense's recommendations, he was proud to going to be awarding me the Medal of Honor. And um, from that moment to being in the White House and having him drape the medal around my neck until now, I'm thankful and I think proud to say that I don't feel like the medal has affected or changed um, me as a person. I feel like I'm the same kid that was like playing and kickball in middle school. But what it has done is it's given me a unique perspective. I think that thankfully, unfortunately, most people don't have, and most service members don't have. And that is, at the time, not only was out in the middle of my college career, but when the medal happened, everything was so just beyond chaotic. I mean, you could barely, even just during the ceremony, not to mention the media tour after, you could barely hear yourself think because the cameras going off in the back of the room. So in that moment, of course, I've always known that it's not my medal or any individual's, but I needed time to continue to, one, heal mentally and emotionally, even though I was out of the hospital, and two, think deeply and reflect on what it really means and represents. And over the years, I've come to realize that, yes, it represents my story, my family's journey of serving and sacrificing with me. Go beyond that, my fellow Marines that were there on the ground with me, those that served and sacrificed, and then those that gave their last full measure of devotion for their country. Go beyond that, you think about the families that will always be missing a loved one, the kids that uh, won't have a parent to make them that bowl of cereal, to get them on the bus or off to school, help them with their homework. Beyond that, the people of Afghanistan that I saw every day, the look in their eyes of just wanting to hopefully one day, just one day, wake up and taste peace and freedom and know what that feels like, and to be able to want to learn how to read and be able to do that without fearing death at the end of the day. Go beyond that, it represents the past generations of service members and Marines who not only raised their right hand, but in fields of Vietnam covered grenades for their fellow Marines, who at 16, 17, 18, 19 years old charged the beaches of Iwo Jima and the beaches and islands throughout the Pacific, and we're told that probably not even going to make it off the landing craft. And if you do, you're probably not going to survive to make it on, to the beach. And they did that and charged for it anyway. And, above all of that, those that not only gave that last full measure of devotion, but that are still missing in action. And we can't tell their families how they gave that ultimate sacrifice. So it's heavy. It's a beautiful burden, but I am thankful and humbled and profoundly grateful that I was recognized and told thank you by my country. But, I feel like I'm just an instrument to educate those who haven't raised their right hand and honor those that have.